It's now been over 4 months since the Nintendo Switch 2 first launched. And after playing this basically every single day and racking up hundreds of hours on it, I'm going to give you my honest thoughts on whether or not this is worth it, or if I've got Nintendo Switch 2 regrets. Now, I think in order to properly explain my thoughts on the Nintendo Switch 2, we first need to go into why I upgraded in the first place. You see, I am someone who absolutely loved my Nintendo Switch. And before I even made this YouTube channel, this was not only my main way of playing games, but at one point my only way of playing games. But the Nintendo Switch most definitely started to show its age, especially in the last year or so. And it kind of got to the point towards the end where it felt like the compromises I needed to make to play games on the Switch were just not worth it. Meaning that even though this was the console that made me fall in love with indie games, it just wasn't cut out for most of them anymore. And that's why I bought the Nintendo Switch 2. I was hoping that this would solve all of those problems. And ever since the day I first got it and unboxed it, this has become my main gaming machine. And this meant not only was I gaming in the comfort of my own home by playing it docked on the TV and of course in bed because that is my favorite place to play games, but I also took it out and about with me. Because wherever I went, the Nintendo Switch 2 came with me. So this meant it's been on planes, trains, and road trips to see if it truly lives up to being a handheld console hybrid. And whilst the Nintendo Switch 2 is by no means perfect, I don't think I could ever go back to playing the Nintendo Switch after playing this. Although I do wish that Nintendo could have added on to the brand new console feel by giving us a homepage that wasn't identical to its previous console. Because I'm gonna be honest, unboxing the entire Switch 2, setting everything up, which took a while, to then only be greeted by the exact same page you've been looking at when you've been playing your Nintendo Switch for years, was a little bit anticlimactic. So Nintendo, I beg of you, just give us themes for the Switch 2. It would be fantastic. Now, one of the first things that I noticed when I took the Nintendo Switch 2 out of the box was how much bigger it was than the Nintendo Switch. And whilst that is true, the Switch 2 is noticeably larger than the Nintendo Switch, I actually really like that about it. Because this means that we've got a bigger screen, which makes handheld gaming already better, but also larger Joy-Cons. So the buttons are spaced out a little bit more, and the whole console just feels more comfortable in your hands. And it is worth mentioning that I think I have pretty small hands and I still found this comfortable. And actually, I think I wound up playing in handheld mode with the Nintendo Switch 2 way more than I did with the Nintendo Switch. And despite the fact that it was a bit larger, it was still a great size to pop in my bag and take with me wherever I went. That being said, as you can see, my Switch 2 experience was made all the better with a grip. It doesn't really matter what grip you go for. Any grip is better than just holding the Switch 2 by itself. But if you are an anti-grip person, the Switch 2 does feel a lot nicer than the Nintendo Switch to hold by itself. And if you're worried that the Nintendo Switch 2 screen is going to feel like a downgrade compared to the OLED, I wouldn't worry too much. Other than the fact that this has pretty large bezels, I do think the Nintendo Switch 2 screen does look great. The fact that it is 1080p instead of 720p feels like an upgrade, and the HDR does make a huge difference. The only thing I wish is that the screen was less glossy, as it's really hard to see in direct sunlight. By far the biggest issue I've had with the Switch 2 in handheld mode has been its battery life. I find myself getting an average of around 4-ish hours in handheld, which I do wish was much longer, as I often have to find a charger mid-journey for my Switch 2 to last. But the place where I notice the battery issues the most isn't actually when playing games, it's instead when I've put my Nintendo Switch to sleep. You see, by far one of the biggest strengths of the Switch compared to any other handheld is the ability to mid-game just press the power button and pause the game wherever you are instantly. Then when you're ready to pick it back up, you can simply just press the power button and continue where you left off. The issue is the Switch 2 uses a lot more battery when it's idle compared to my Nintendo Switch. So I often found myself at places like the airport realizing that I'd actually run out of battery when the Nintendo Switch typically would have dealt with that amount of time completely fine. And I do know that this can be solved quite simply by closing down the games and turning off your Nintendo Switch. It's definitely something that I never really encountered with the original Switch that I've had to deal with this one. And that basically means that my rucksack now holds my Nintendo Switch 2 and a power pack so I can charge it up whenever I go on a journey. Next up, let's talk about general wear and tear, because even though it has only been 4 months, a few things have already started to crop up. Now, I have tried to treat this with care as much as possible, you know, making sure I have it in a carry case when I travel and keeping it away from animals and, you know, kids as well. And so far, I think it's held up pretty good. The weakest part by far is the screen. I went without a screen protector for half a day, and that was already enough to mark the screen with some considerable scratches. So literally the second you pull this out of the box, make sure you're shoving on a screen protector. It's one of the most important things to do. I also have a case on the Nintendo Switch 2, but that's less so because it needed one and more so because I wanted one, because the Nintendo Switch 2 is so unbelievably boring. I hate the fact that it came in all black and no other colors, and I've been doing my best to find as many accessories that liven this up and also let you know that this is your Nintendo Switch. So this does mean I can't really comment on whether it picks up scratches or not, but from what I've seen so far with my time outside of it being in a case, it hasn't really got scratched up at all. So despite the color being boring, it is actually at least scratch resistant. I think the main place that gives away that this has been used is just the sticks. You can see them when you look really close that they've got a bit of wear and tear, but honestly, not too bad for the hours that I've put in, and I think they're gonna last more or less in this state for a while. This is also a great time to talk about the dreaded Joy-Con drift. Joy-Con drift was hands down the worst thing about the Nintendo Switch, and a lot of people were worried that it was going to persist over to the Nintendo Switch 2 because it didn't seem like Nintendo had changed too much about the Joy-Cons. But I can happily say that not only have I not experienced any Joy-Con drift so far, I haven't really seen any reports of it online yet either. And I do think if Nintendo hadn't fixed it, we probably would be seeing reports right about now about people who had played the Switch 2 a lot getting it. So this has made me pretty hopeful that maybe this is something Nintendo has actually figured out. Okay, next, let's talk about the Pro Controller, because this is something I am continually asked whether it is or isn't worth the price. And whilst the price point is incredibly expensive, I can honestly say this might be my favorite controller ever. The back buttons, for example, are something I've had a surprising amount of use of so far. You can reprogram what they do in any game, and it is really useful to have. But by far the thing that is the biggest difference between the Switch controller and the Switch 2 Pro controller is these sticks. These just feel so unbelievably smooth and glide around so much more than the Switch controller did, and I can really feel the difference when I switch between them. I'm also happy to say this doesn't get nearly as dirty as I was expecting it to, even with the matte finish. So even though I can't 100% say this is worth the money, as it is really expensive, if you buy one, I think you're gonna really enjoy it. The next thing I want to touch on is the Nintendo Switch gimmicks, the main one being the mouse mode. Now, it was used in a lot of detail in Drag X Drive, but unfortunately that game wasn't even relevant the day it released, so not a lot of people played it. But as of right now, the mouse mode has not really been utilized all that much outside of Drag X Drive. I know Metroid Prime is coming out, which is planning on using it. We also know that Stardew Valley is coming out, which will use the mouse mode as well. Unfortunately though, we've also heard that 2 Point Museum, despite the fact that it is a management game, currently will not have a mouse mode feature in it. So clearly not all the developers are utilizing this feature, and the management genre is the one that needs it the most. So it's really sad to see they haven't even gone for it. So at the moment, it is feeling a little bit on the gimmick side and not really something that's amazingly useful, but I do hope this is something that's going to change over time. We also haven't really seen any games other than a couple of first-party titles use anything to do with the camera. Again, I hope this changes. I feel like you can do a lot of really fun stuff with it. Mario Party Jamboree did dabble in it, but I also know that not many of us bothered to pick up the DLC, so it hasn't really been utilized all that much. Next up, let's talk about games, because I feel like this is the Nintendo Switch 2's biggest strength, but also currently its biggest weakness. Because let's be honest, Nintendo have made nothing but confusing and questionable decisions when it comes to the games. Like, let's start with Mario Kart World. It is a really fun game, but it is also a really terrible price tag. And if I'm being entirely honest, whilst I did enjoy my time with it in the first couple of weeks, it's not actually something I found myself going back to all that much so far. Donkey Kong, however, I thought was absolutely fantastic. I'm not someone who typically loves 3D platformers, but I had a blast playing it, and I think this game truly highlights how much more powerful the Switch 2 is versus the Switch, especially in docked mode, because with it being 4K and HDR, it looked absolutely incredible. Then we had the introduction of variable prices, which don't feel all that variable at the moment. It just feels expensive. I also love the fact that Nintendo have been giving us free Nintendo Switch game upgrades, giving them better graphics and frame rates on the Switch 2. I think the most notable ones I've played so far has been Pokemon Scarlet and Violet and The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. And truly, I think Echoes of Wisdom was made for the Switch 2. This is how the game should have looked. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, they did their best with it. It looks way better than it did on the Switch, but definitely has a long way to go to look graphically in place on the Switch 2. And the best part is Nintendo seem to be continuously adding to its library of games, getting a free Nintendo Switch 2 upgrade, which is great as it's bringing people to games that they might have skipped on the Nintendo Switch when they're desperately looking for something else to play on the Switch 2. Then we have the not so great thing, which is Nintendo Switch 2 editions of Nintendo Switch games. Honestly, I don't like these, and I truly don't know someone who does or someone that wants them. They basically add on DLC to existing Nintendo Switch games and then upgrade them to Nintendo Switch 2 to justify charging money for the upgrade. I think the best of them so far has been the Kirby one, but I truthfully wasn't the biggest fan of how they even did that one. They sort of added little bits on to existing levels, and I don't really understand why they didn't make it like a proper DLC, where they added brand new levels for us to run around. I feel like that would have been so much more worthwhile the money instead of what they did, and it sort of feels like they're just trying to justify charging you for a Nintendo Switch 2 upgrade. I personally think you should just have got them all for free and then paid for the DLC if you wanted to, rather than lumping in the upgrade and the DLC. At least then I might have been a little bit more excited when I see them announced in Nintendo Directs, rather than now when I just don't really feel any sort of way about it. I think the other issue I have with games on the Nintendo Switch 2 right now is that I love indie games, but there is barely any of them made for the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, don't get me wrong, the ones we have gotten so far have been incredible. The Silk Song Switch 2 port is fantastic, so is Hades 2. I've personally really been enjoying the Story of Seasons Grand Bazaar Switch 2 edition and the Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma, because these have been absolutely fantastic and have been exactly what I wanted. They have made me feel like I am finally getting the full experience on a Nintendo device. No compromises made. The issue is there is just so few of them. And currently, most of the indie games that are coming out are just getting a Nintendo Switch release. And although these do work on the Nintendo Switch 2, the issue is that they not only don't make use of the Nintendo Switch 2's power, they also look worse in handheld on the Switch 2, because it's a 720p image stretched now on a 1080p screen. So with games that have a lot of text in them, like Day Everything, they take a huge hit when you're playing them on the Switch 2 versus the Switch. It's completely fine to play in docked mode, there is no difference, but it is truly handheld where you suffer the most. Now the thing is, we can't really talk about Nintendo Switch games without addressing the game keycard issue. So if you didn't already know, Nintendo releases physical games in 3 different ways. First up is the best way. This is where the entire game is on the game cartridge. And so far, this has been the way that every single first-party game has been sold physically. And you can see that this says on the game itself that this has the entire game all on the cartridge. And thankfully, it isn't just Nintendo releasing games like this, we've had the likes of Cyberpunk come along and do it as well. The second way is by far the worst way, and that is when there is only a code inside of the box. So that means your Nintendo Switch box will be empty, and all it will have inside of it is a code that you go and enter on the eShop. This means that it is the exact same situation as if you went and bought the game on the eShop and never went into the store to begin with. They suck, and the only thing that I like about them is the fact that Nintendo have made it very clear that this is what you get on the box now. The final and most controversial way that we're seeing physical games at the moment is the game key card. And with this, you do get a physical game cartridge inside of the box. However, it does not have the entire game on it. So you will then need to go and connect to the internet to download the rest of the game to be able to play it. Now this does have some advantages when you compare it to the code in a box, and that is that you can give this game cartridge to anyone who can then play the game for themselves, or you can even sell it on. The issue with these types of games though is it means that they won't last forever. The day Nintendo stops supporting the eShop is the day that these games cease to exist, unless you've already downloaded them to your Switch. The issue we're finding though is just how many third-party developers are choosing to go this route over putting the entire game on the Switch 2 cartridge. And honestly, I don't think it matters why the developers are choosing to do it, it just matters that Nintendo tries to find a way to fix it. Because it truly sucks that right now, there are so few games that have the entire game on a game cartridge and don't need to connect to the internet to download them. I think for me personally though, the biggest issue I have with the games on the Nintendo Switch 2 is that there just isn't enough of them. Now the good news is this will get better over time. You see, in just 2025 alone, we still have Kirby Air Riders, the brand new Hyrule Warriors game, and Metroid Prime 4 releasing. We also know that Witchbrook is coming in the winter with its own Nintendo Switch 2 version. And thanks to the last Nintendo Direct, we have a ton of upcoming releases to look forward to as well over the next 6 months. Next year is also an anniversary for Mario and Pokemon, so people are expecting some pretty big announcements coming with both of those. And we also know there's a ton of games that are going to come to the Nintendo Switch 2, it's just a case of when and not if. A good example, and my favorite one, is Animal Crossing. Because ever since Animal Crossing first came out, we've been given a brand new game on every single console Nintendo has launched. So we know it's coming, it's just a case of when in the Switch 2's lifespan we're gonna see it. And the best part is Animal Crossing isn't the only one. We know we're gonna get another Pikmin, Mario, Zelda, and probably Splatoon as well on this console. And it does appear like Nintendo are trying to be a little bit more careful about when they announce these games. They used to announce them years away from release, whereas now most of the directs just seem to cover things that are coming out in the next 6 to 9 months. So that means that when we do finally hear about them, we won't have maybe as long of a wait as we're used to, which is great. And as dev kits get more accessible, we should also see more indie games come to the console as well. So overall, do I regret buying the Nintendo Switch 2? Absolutely not. I've actually found that I've been gaming so much more since this came out because I've just wanted to be exploring and trying all of the games that I can on this device. Whether or not you should buy it though depends purely on the games. Because the reality is, if you wait a year to buy this, if you wait 2 years to buy this, all the games that have just come out or are coming out in the next 6 months will still be there when you buy it. And that's not even mentioning the fact that we know that there is most likely going to be another version of this coming out in a year or two. We're probably going to get an OLED version. We're probably going to get a Switch Lite, and we're hopefully going to get an upgrade that helps this battery life. My only hope with Nintendo going forward is that I feel like at the moment they've been focused a lot on their hardcore player base, and hopefully they start coming after us casual gamers a little bit more with years to come. Because for the first time in a while, I feel like Nintendo Directs don't excite me quite as much as they used to. That is my full review of the Nintendo Switch 2 after 4 months. Let me know your thoughts down below and what game you are waiting for to tempt you to buy a Switch 2. And if you want to see my roundup of all the games that I've been playing recently, click this video here.